Good evening, good afternoon, everyone. Hope you guys are doing well from wherever you're joining us from. It's a pleasure to have you with us, especially as we're going to talk about pharmacovigilance. And the key conversation today is about pharmacovigilance reporting and the reports. And what we want to understand is what stories do these reports tell? How do we ensure that we're giving the right information when we report on pharmacovigilance safety-related conversations and challenges? But at the same time, the person reviewing it on the other side of the industry, what do they see? How do they make sense of this? And actually, most importantly, how do those reports translate to value for us on the other side in terms of the people who are consuming products? And I believe all of us, in one way or the other, as consumers of the medical products and technologies and the medicines that we are using. And therefore, these pharmacovigilance reporting and the story that those reports tell are of essence and of value to all of us in our different walks of life. So with that said, as African Pharmaceutical Network, one of the key things that is amazing about how we engage is that we are keen on fostering connections and building networks with other people. So for those of you who have joined us today, I would encourage that let's use the chat box. Introduce yourself by telling us who you are, where you're joining us from, and most importantly, if you have your LinkedIn profile link available, share it out there so that whoever might be interested in engaging with you in the line of work that you're in, they have a mechanism of reaching you. So let's make the best of that. With that said, we'll start with that initial survey, and I'll hand it over to you, Julia, to just bring up that survey up on the screen for our people to respond to it. Seeing the poster. Not the survey yet. Good. So what we need to understand is just where you're joining us from, what your expectations are for the session, and anything that you want to share with us. So Juliet has already brought in the screen, scan the QR code, and if possible, let's get to hear from you and know where you're joining us from. Nairobi, thank you. You let us know where you're joining in from, the country or the county that you are. What comes to mind when you hear about pharmacovigilance reports and reporting, and what are you looking to learn in this session today? That's basically it. So it's a relatively short survey just to gauge what your expectations are, to also ensure that we deliver on what you're expecting of us as you've already structured. And I'm glad that our facilitator is already here with us. For those who are not able to scan the code, I've shared the link as well in the chat. So please do look into it and you can click and just respond to it. Good. Abdullah from Senegal, glad to have you here with us. South Africa, Tanzania, that's good progress. Juliet, scrolling to the other slides. Yes, 76. So I'm expecting at least let us get 10, 20 responses at the bare minimum. Then we move to the next part of this. Anita Mburu from Kenya, thank you. Volume is too low. I hope, can you guys hear me better now? Hello. Confirm you can hear me well and my volume is okay. Faith from Kenya, yes. Thank you. Okay, I'm seeing thumbs up. Yeah. I like it when you guys are giving the feedback from that. We have QPPV from C Plus South Africa, who is joining us, Diamond Nido. Fantastic. Good. 9 responses and growing. I see we have South Africa, Nairobi still leading Kenya, Tanzania, Ireland, British. Yes, Boaz from Tanzania. British Virgin Islands, I believe. Yes. Good. Scroll to the next slide so that we can see what's coming on the other side. What comes to mind when you hear about pharmacovigilance reports and reporting? We look at safety, patient safety, safe medicine safety, medical use, analyzing data. So how do we analyze that data and how do we make sense of it? Very, very important. You can use the chart. You can fill it in the survey form. Let us get to know where you're joining us from, but also what you're expecting of us. So that is the one word that comes to your mind. Safety is coming out in every single piece of it. Safety, safety. And this is safety of health products and technologies. Juliet, go to the next slide. That is the last question. What are you looking to learn? Pharmacovigilance insights, marketing authorization holder responsibilities, PV reports, the African context, especially with PV reporting requirements, pharmacovigilance countries and companies. Good. So with that said, please, for those who have not yet done so, continue filling the survey form. We will go back to that survey actually as we go to the end, mostly to assess whether we've captured what really needs to be in scope for us. And beyond that, to get to understand whether we've met your expectations for the day to day. So we'll get back to it. For now, I'll bring up my screen. And as I'm bringing back my screen, let me know when you can see it. For those, all of us who are here, African Pharmaceutical Network, as a Pan-African convener and advisory firm, our main mechanism of working and our actually hope and aspiration is to ensure that we bring people together to facilitate shared learning and insights. I would say more collaborative learning from each other. And as we are doing that, the essence is to ensure that every single individual within the continent of Africa has access to safe, effective, and quality health products and technologies, including the medicines in that scope of things. And how do we do this? We do this through such forums where we invite speakers and guest speakers from different spaces who have unique insights and unique experiences that are valuable to us to help us, one, to do our work in a better way as professionals, because all these things that we are aspiring for, they're done by the professionals who are doing the job. And that is an important piece. For our workers and organization, we started on the backdrop of COVID-19, and we understand that the pharmaceutical industry and the life science industry in Africa is less developed still, and there's an opportunity for us to drive the conversation and move it to the next level. Beyond that, each of us in the different facets of practice have always been in silos, and our mission and our core driving force behind the things that we do is to bring together stakeholders, harness the capabilities and the possibilities in industry, and use it to deploy solutions that are of value to the individuals working within that ecosystem where we are, that is within the life science industry, and it is to ensure there's reliability in access to safe, effective, and quality products. And pharmacovigilance becomes a core part of that in what we're going to look at today. As we do this, some of the key services that we offer is through workforce development, through training programs, and we have our Pharmacy Academy that offers professional and executive education programs. We offer regulatory support services, mostly from intelligence, new product registration, lifecycle maintenance, and ultimately to pharmacovigilance oversight and QPPV services. Business ecosystem support, mostly advisory and market research, market intelligence, talent management, and related support. And the last piece is engaging with the regulators and government agencies to shape the markets on where the activities are happening. And when we talk about, for example, this pharmacovigilance reporting, how do we ensure that governments have frameworks in place to enable reporting to happen? But most importantly, the enforcement mechanisms are responsive to the industry players, whether the patients, physicians, healthcare professionals, and the marketing authorization holders and industry players to ensure that that's working in a robust way. These are the courses that we currently have, and we have a couple of others that are coming up. feel free to check our website, africanpharmanetwork.net. You'll be able to see more of the things that we do. And with that said, I'll introduce our speaker for the day, and I'll ask you to bring your slide up, Ondatile, as you're getting ready for the next part of this. So Ondatile is a patient safety expert working as a Senior Director of Global Patient Safety in Medical Review. She's based in Ireland, and she provides medical oversight for adverse event reporting and safety surveillance activities. Her responsibilities include evaluating individual case safety reports, leading safety signal detection efforts, and collaborating with global teams to ensure that safe use of pharmaceutical products. She brings a unique perspective to pharmacovigilance, combining her clinical experience. She's a medical doctor by training with specialized global clinical trial expertise gained through different practice spaces. She worked as a clinical research physician at Synexis Clinical Research and medical study manager at Atlantia Clinical Trials. During those roles, she conducted medical monitoring and adverse event assessment across phase 3 and phase 4 clinical studies. She also practiced as an emergency medical officer during COVID-19, and she holds a Master of Science in International Health and Tropical Medicine from the University of Oxford, a postgraduate certificate in International Regulatory Affairs from Southeast Technological University, and her medical degree from the University of Free State, South Africa. She has recently been elected the Vice Chair of the Association of Pharmaceutical Physicians in Ireland. Ontatile is a friend and is a colleague. I remember we studied together with her in the UK, and now she's here to share her insights and also contribute to our pharmacovigilance journey. So over to you, Ontatile.
Thank you so much, David, for the lovely welcome. And I hope everybody can see my slide.
Yes, we can see them.
Okay, perfect. Good afternoon to everybody, and I hope everybody's having a good Friday. And on this day, we'll be talking more about pharmacovigilance and safety reports in particular. And these are all trying to tell us a story, and I'll be walking you through the journey of the medical report. Now, pharmacovigilance, which is the overarching topic, that's a science of and activities that are related to detecting and assessing adverse effects or any other medicine-related problems. So in this session, I will be focusing on the detection of those adverse effects by the reporting of pharmacovigilance reports. So hopefully by the end of this session, you'll be able to, know the different types of pharmacovigilance safety reports, individual and aggregate reports, understand the critical elements that are important for a valid case report, interpret and analyze the stories that these reports are trying to tell us, recognize the impact that pharmacovigilance reporting has within marketing authorizations or the field of pharmaceutical medicine, understanding the distinction between real-world data and real-world evidence, which has been buzzwords within the last few years, and then just highlighting the challenges that we're still seeing in terms of pharmacovigilance reporting globally and specific to the African context. And then I don't like to end on a negative note of just the challenges, and we'll just briefly touch on what to expect in the future of pharmacovigilance reporting. My slide's not moving. Oh, there we go. So competent authorities like regulatory bodies or WHO or marketing authorization holders, they should all take appropriate measures to collect and collate all pharmacovigilance reports. Now, these reports can be either individual case reports, which is where they're highlighting one particular patient, or there could be aggregated safety reports, which is a collation of multiple patients using the same medicinal products. So what are individual case safety reports? These are reports of suspected adverse reactions. So we're identifying this adverse event to have occurred in a patient taking a particular drug, and this is happening in a single patient. Now, these reports can either be solicited or spontaneous, unsolicited, on spontaneous reports. And these are direct communications that are sent to these competent authorities by healthcare providers or by a consumer, somebody using the actual product. And they submit their reports or their report to these organizations describing one or more adverse events in a patient who is exposed to one or more medicinal product. And we consider unsolicited or spontaneous reports to be reports that are collected outside of a normal organized data collection scheme. Now, when you look at solicited reports, those are derived from organized data collection systems. And this could be the clinical trials, patient support programs, or non-interventional studies, which are also called post-authorization safety studies. They could be part of market research programs. So basically, solicited reports, there's an organized system that's already been created, and this is a way for reports to be collected. Now, in this series of slides, we'll be focusing mainly on the individual case reports. And this is where the focus of the story will be. I'll just briefly touch on aggregated safety reports, but this is the cornerstone of each pharmacovigilance story that we're trying to be told. Now, as I said at the beginning, we've discussed the types of pharmacovigilance reports. Now, let's take a deep dive into what these individual case safety reports, which are the basic building blocks of pharmacovigilance reporting, what are they trying to tell us? Each individual case safety report is telling us a story. It's telling us who, it's telling us how this happened, what happened, when it happened, where it happened, and possibly why it's happened. If it's within a solicited report, an investigator could tell us why this could have possibly happened. Now, why are we looking at individual case reports? These are the cornerstones of each pharmacovigilance reporting because every adverse event should be traced back to a particular patient. Now, for a report to be valid, what is needed? Before we submit any case report to a competent authority or to a marketing authorization holder, this report needs to be validated by submitting it through the competent authorities. And to be eligible for submission to any regulatory authority, it must have 4 minimum criteria. The first criteria is that this report needs to have an identifiable patient. To whom did this happen to? We have to have at least one adverse event or adverse drug reaction. The distinction between AE and an adverse drug reaction is with adverse drug reaction, we're saying this is suspected to be due to the product that the patient is taking. Third criteria is a suspect drug. So it needs to be identified in each individual case report what drug this is being attributable to. And then lastly, there needs to be identifiable reporter. Where is this report coming from and who is telling us the story? So in short, a valid report, as an example, you have a person A who's reporting that patient X experienced an adverse event B while they were taking drug B. So at the basic of every individual case report, it needs to tell that basic story. Who reported it? Whom did it occur to? What happened? What drugs were they taking at the time? Cases that are missing any of the above criteria do not qualify for individual case reporting, and a competent authority must complete due diligence follow-up to collect all the missing criteria in order to make a valid report. So if we receive a report and it's not clear what what medications the patient was on or who the patient may be, we don't just throw out the case even though it's non-valid. It is recorded and we try to validate it by following up to get all the 4 pillars of that report. So that is the due diligence of the competent authority or the regulatory body that's receiving this report. They have to seek out this information so that the report can become valid. We can't just be throwing them away because then we'll also lose a lot more data. So very important whenever you're looking at an individual case report, make sure that you can identify these 4 pillars. Now, each individual case study reports tells a story. We've now known the 4 pillars that are necessary for it to be valid, but that's not the entire story. We need to know more about the story. We need more information about the reporter. You know, what type of reporter is it? Is it a healthcare reporter that's calling in to tell us about this report? Is it the patient, or is it the patient's mother who's reporting because it's a pediatric child, or it's a caregiver that's reporting this case? What other medications was this patient on? Now, when you're reporting an individual case study report, you're identifying that this is the particular drug we're actually talking about in this report, but there may be other drugs that the patient are taking that are not essential to the story, but create background that is very important when we're assessing more about this case. We need to know more about the actual report. Is this an initial report? Is it a follow-up report? When was this report received? We need narrative details. What happened? When did it happen? What is the journey that this patient was taking us on? We need to know more about the patient, male, female, pediatric, elderly, comorbid. What are they being treating? What are they being treated for? Is it a patient who's in a clinical trial? Is it a patient who self-prescribed medication or took over-the-counter medication? Is it a patient who's in a hospital? And we need to know more about the AE or the ADR. Is this the first time they've had this? Have they had similar AEs? What other AEs happened in the scenario? We need to know the suspect drugs. Are we attributing this to one drug or more than one drug? So these are all information that color the picture of the story when we receive these drugs. So in this slide, I have an example of a solicited report. Remember, solicited are ones that are coming through organized data collection systems. So I need you to spend a few seconds just going through this narrative and then think to yourself, what kind of report is this? One, is it valid? And does it have sufficient details for us to make an assessment? But more importantly, is this a valid report? So if people can just drop into the chat whether they think this is a valid report, if it has the 4 pillars that we've discussed. I'll just check if there's 1 or 2 responses. So while we're waiting for the responses in this report, we have a 58-year-old male patient. He's a type 2 diabetic. He's on this drug X, 500 milligrams since January of 2024. He's been well controlled on metformin, which is another drug, for 5 years prior. And on day 3 of using this drug, the patient experienced severe muscle pain and weakness. And they had lab tests that were done, and the CK was high, creatinine kinase. They also have elevated creatinine, which is a renal test, and the drug was discontinued immediately. On day 7, post-continuation, after they'd stopped, the CK had decreased to 450, and the creatinine was back to normal values, and the symptoms fully resolved. No re-challenge was attempted, meaning they did not try to reinitiate the drug, and the concomitant medications that the patient was on was metformin, atorvastatin, stable for 3 years with no previous issues. The reporter assessed this drug X induced rhabdomyolysis has possibly potentiated by statin for administration. So I see few responses that yes, this is a valid report, yeah, because we do have an identifiable reporter, we do have an identifiable patient, and we do have an adverse reaction, which is muscle pain and weakness, and we also have a suspect drug, which is drug X. So this is not just a valid report, it's an excellent report because we have a complete timeline, we have objective measurements, they've given us lab results, there's a clear outcome, it resolved post discontinuing the drug, we have detailed data, we have consideration of drug interactions, and with detailed clinical context. Now, this is the ideal report, but in reality, we don't always receive reports like this. More often than not, in spontaneous reports, you can receive a report like this. Now, Is this report valid? These are just some of the few questions. If this is all you have received from a spontaneous report that a nurse reported that a patient on drug X developed side effect and the doctor stopped the medication. These are some of the questions to ask yourself. Is this report valid? Do we have complete information? What is missing?
I
Yeah,
think there are
I'm
people
seeing
who are
responses
saying
in the
there's need
chat.
for follow-up. I would be keen
Yeah,
to hear what they're saying should be the questions we're asking. What are we looking for that is not provided for in the 4 criteria that you mentioned?
yeah. Thank you. That is so correct. So we're missing, this report is not valid. We do have an identifiable reporter. So it was reported by a nurse. We do have a suspect drug X, but we don't have an adverse effect, developed side effect. What side effect? So this is not enough information for us to know what type of side effect it is. So we're missing one of the pillars there, and we know that the doctor stopped the medication. So that doesn't give us complete information. A lot is missing. We don't know much about the patient demographics, age, sex. We don't know much about the specific adverse events. We don't have a timeline. We don't have a drug dose and duration. We don't have outcome details. There's a lot of missing information. So, unfortunately, these are the reports you may receive more often than not, and we have to follow up those patients. So, what we're looking for is a complete story. So follow-up reports enhance the story by providing us detailed patient drug and characteristics. It gives us outcome information, additional clinical details, corrected information, causality, is this possibly related to the drug, definitely related to drug, or not related to the drug. It also is giving us long-term sequelae. So when we first received the initial reports, the information in most individual case study reports may be incomplete. So it's very important um, as people within the space to search up for this follow-up. If somebody's on the phone and you're on the receiving end, ask the pertinent questions. And it's okay if you don't have all the questions at the moment, you can always go back. But remember, a quality and a valid report, they offer strong positive indicators. They can also include confounding factors. So it's very important. Sometimes it's not always as clear as example one that I gave us that this is likely due to the drug. Sometimes there could be confounding factors. Patient can be on multiple medications that could cause the same drug reaction. It could be normal disease progression of the actual disease being treated. It could be other illnesses that are attributed to this. So it's very, very important that when you receive the reports, make sure that it's telling a complete story. Now, best practices for follow-up. It's very important that we allow for chronological details. Details like how did it start, when did it start, what occurred during the process, not just he fell and then he got better. There's a lot that could happen in between. Did he have surgery? Did he visit the ED for that? Did he have a fracture or was it a sprain? So it gives us insights onto what is missing. So when following up, because that means you might end up with two reports that are referring to one incident. So it's very important to note the dates of follow-up reports because sometimes the story is still evolving. You can get a report of somebody still admitted in hospital. So when you get a follow-up report, clearly reference the initial report, that this is follow-up to initial report that was received on date X, indicate what new information is provided. What is important here is also to indicate any conflicting information. Sometimes the information, the follow-up, does not always clarify the initial report, but may offer conflicting information. That as well still needs to be followed. A follow-up report may have updated outcomes or causalities. Document any additional interventions and make note of any inconsistencies between the reports. So when you look at these pharmacovigilance reports or individual case safety reports, they're trying to provide clinical context. So there's some reporting pitfalls that we can try to avoid when we are the ones either documenting these reports or writing these reports. It's very important with reports, pharmacovigilance reports, to separate facts from opinions. So vague descriptions like patient felt unwell, you cannot code or analyze that. What exactly happened? What does unwell mean for this patient? Does unwell mean headache? Does it mean fatigue? Does it mean malaise? So this needs to be specified. Missing timeline happened sometime in March. This is very important. If you started the drug on the 28th of February, if it happened sometime in March, 1st of March could really imply causality because it happened within 24 hours of you receiving a dose, while 31st of March could be something else. We don't know. So we have a missing timeline. Incomplete drug information, blood pressure medication. You cannot identify suspect drug. There's a lot of pressure medication. And I know when I was still in clinical practice, in South Africa, you'd always get it. This happens all over the world. It's not unique to South Africa, where patients will be like, I'm on blood pressure medication, I'm on diabetes medication. And then we have to prompt them which ones. And they're like, oh no, the white pill that's a bit round. And you're like, which one? Because there's many white pills and there's many round pills. So you need to identify the suspect drug. Sometimes you get a report with no outcome. Patient developed rash. End of story. We need to have more. Or mixing multiple events. A confusing narrative with multiple AEs. Think of sometimes when you're sitting next to your grandmother, she's telling you a story. There could be lots of details, not all of them relevant to the story. So it's also very important when you're reporting this to make sure that you're highlighting what is important to the story and what is background. Leaving out negative findings. It's very important in reports not to exclude negative findings. They're just as important as positive findings. Abbreviations without explanations. Different hospitals, different countries use different abbreviations in different ways. So some people for hypertension, they can write it as HEN versus HPT. So we cannot assume which one is which. So it's very important if you're getting a report to make sure that you're understanding that this is hypertension, is they understand that there's hypertension and get that in writing. So when reporting individual case study reports, make sure to avoid these common reporting pitfalls that you may find. Now that we've actually talked about the building block of safety reporting, which is the individual case study reports, what happens? What other assessments go through when we get an individual case reports? So first we start with report generation or the report initiation. These reports are generated from healthcare providers. They can be patients or consumers, regulatory authorities. They can come from literature or comprehensive data collection across multiple or individual sources. So this is what we talked about already, the building block. Now, next, we collect and validate these reports. We process data entry, we acknowledge that the report has actually been received, and we check for validity for each individual report. Does each individual report meet the four minimum criteria of a suspect drug, of identifiable patient, of an identifiable reporter, and an adverse event or adverse drug reaction? So these are collected and validated. And once we've recognized that this is a valid report, we can also ask for follow-up to get more details about those reports. But what happens after that? Once we've had a complete story, we now move forward to the medical review or assessing of this individual case study report. So we look for seriousness determination. Does this meet seriousness criteria per GCP? Or is this a done serious event? Expectedness, is this expected per available reference safety information, or is this expected per the SPMC? And we look at clinical interpretation. An event can not be expected per available reference safety information, but per this information that's available, we can clinically interpret that it's possibly due to the drug. So this is where you need a clinician, a nurse, or a doctor to actually look at it objectively for that individual case and see, could it be related to a drug or not? And then finally, once we've assessed all these individual case reports and reviewed and assessed them, then they need to be submitted. The marketing authorizing holder doesn't just keep these reports. The specific reporting timelines to serious adverse events or serious unexpected suspected adverse reactions, or SUSAs in short. Usually these need to be reported within 7 to 15 days to a regulatory authority, be it a national regulatory agency or an international one like WHO. So this will depend on your territory or your country, but there's always for SUSAs and SAE specific documented regulatory timelines. So it is important that your individual case study reports, even after being reported to you or your marketing authorizing holder, still goes through all these checks to make sure it's also reported to governing bodies, relevant governing bodies within your area. So we've told and we've spoken about the story. Now, what are they trying to tell us? What is this individual case study reports? What are they trying to tell us? How can we understand or prevent future adverse effects from happening using the information that we already have from these individual case study reports? What understanding are we getting from all of these individual case study reports? Individual case study reports, they all contribute to signal detection. That's why there's power in quality reports, because one well-documented report can trigger important safety investigations, while poor quality reports fail to reveal a genuine signal. So quality is something that is very important to signal detection and to pharmacovigilance safety reports. So how does an individual case study reports? They can contribute individually. So detailed clinical description, strong temporal relationship. This is meaning that the event happened at the start or initiation of the drug and has a strong temporal relationship. Whether the D-challenge or re-challenges are positive, that can help us with the signal detection. Lack of alternative explanation. This is why you, as a pharmacovigilance person, ask further questions so that we can exclude background activity, exclude that this is likely due to concurrent infection or likely due to other factors. Biological plausibility. What we already know about this drug, can this drug contribute to having these type of AEs? So these are the report value that you can get from individual case reports. Now, when it comes to aggregate safety reports, they give us different value. They're giving us pattern. So we can see different patterns. Is there a specific pattern we're seeing in a specific age group? Maybe this is something that's happening only in the elderly, or happening only in the young, or happening only in people with type 2 diabetes. That's what the value can get from multiple aggregate reports. It's also telling us frequency. Is this common out there in the general population? Is this happening already? Or is this a rare side effects? This happens with the frequency table. Sometimes you see in the SPC. Is it common or is it uncommon? We're seeing similar patient profiles. This is when we can compare these individual case study reports one to each other. We say, oh, this seems to be a trend in a specific patient group. What are the consistent event characteristics? Lots of people reporting headaches, but maybe it's temporal headaches that are being reported. So we can see that from aggregate signal detection from multiple safety sources. It can give us more insights on it's not just a headache, but what we're really seeing is temporal headaches as an example. We can see more emerging data. So it's very, again, important that not only should a report be valid, it should be a quality report with lots of information that were followed up and that were validated. And that way it can contribute to signal detection. So now we've collated or aggregate reports, what are the impact of these quality reports? Where can we see their use in the real world? So regulatory authorities often use these reports as well, and they produce, product information updates. So you could already, once you put your product on the market, have an original um, safety product information sheet. But this can be updated as we get more individual case safety reports from different areas to update it as it's ongoing. There could be addition to warnings and precautions, or it can result in product recall or market withdrawal. I'll give an example of this later. It can also contribute to risk mitigation strategies. So now we found out that, okay, this drug is causing temporal headaches. What can we do to avoid this? What can we do to avoid this? Should we start with, lower dosing before we escalate the dose to different doses? Or should we avoid it in certain patients, or should they take it with water? Will that help the symptoms? It's the kind of information that these safety reports over time can be telling us. An example of an impact of regulatory authorities using information from individual case study report is during the pandemic. Uh, the COVID-19 vaccine had a risk for myocarditis, and this was added to the product information based on the analysis of individual case study reports, which was showing increased myocarditis risk in young males. So another impact of quality individual case study reports could be for the actual drug companies that are creating these drugs. They can update the internal protocols for internal safety reviews for data safety management boards. They can create protocol amendments. They can create comprehensive data analysis, look back at the data that they already collected during clinical trials and looking at it from a different lens, using the information that they've now collected outside once the product has been marketed. They can use information and signals that they're getting from these reports to update medical affairs training, update healthcare provider users on these signals that they're seeing. They can update their manufacturing review processes. They can, I already mentioned protocol amendments, and this includes maybe even updating inclusion-exclusion criteria or adding additional safety points for these participants. Another impacted group by the quality individual case reports is public health. General practice guidelines can become updated as we get more information. Hospital formulary can be, they can add or remove medications. Health insurance coverage policies may change. Your medical aid provider may now start providing or being willing to pay for more drugs or less willing to pay for certain drugs because of the side effects that they're noticing as well. And then lastly, there's an impact on healthcare providers and their patients. Because of the impact of these quality reports, we can get letters to healthcare providers that's communicated from medical boards telling them, be aware of certain risks of this drug in this patient population, or there could be population-specific guidance, or it changes the way you as a prescriber or as a pharmacist would then relay this information when somebody's collecting it at your clinic at a patient. So you'd offer more informed consent and product information changes. So all this to say that when you creating or generating these reports, think of the end in sight. And that's why there's value in making sure each study report is of this particular quality and has all the relevant information that's needed, because it's not just about the individual. There's downstream effects and impacts on regulatory authorities, on drug companies, on public health, and on patients based on each individual case study reports. Now we've generated these stories, we've seen why these stories are important of the patients using our drugs. Now let's look at the real world. What's happening out there? How does the real world interact with our safety reports? So you may already know this, but real world data What is it? It's a new buzzword that's happening all over the recently in the last few years. Real world data refers to data relating to patient health status and or delivery of healthcare routinely collected from a variety of sources outside of traditional clinical trials. As we may know, clinical trials are well controlled. Um, Ways of collecting clinical data. But in the real world, there's no protocol, there's no inclusion criteria, things are chaotic. That's the real world. And data from there can come from lots of people in different ways and tell us so many things. And with some may be useful, some may be just background noise. That's the real world data that we're working with. Now, once we've collected data from real world sources, they are typically observational descriptive in nature since this is not an investigational protocol. However, there can be systems that are designed to specifically gather this information about patient populations, treatments, or healthcare delivery. So there are organizations that go out of their way to collect and observe these real world data and collect them. Now, what kind of sources are out there for real world data? Electronic health records, patient registries for drugs, patient-generated health data, from your mobile devices, your Apple Watches, administrative data like population census, observational cohorts with primary data collection. This could also include post-authorization safety studies, biobanks that are holding your repositories of data that could have been used previously in clinical trials, health surveys, interviews, and focus groups. All of these are potential sources of real-world data. So once we have these data, what do they generate? Real-world evidence refers to insights that we gain from real-world data, and that again collected outside of traditional clinical processes, clinical trial processes. So, unlike a clinical trial with real world evidence, the data is initially gathered for other use, and then we repurpose it or recycle it so that we may gain real world evidence. And the picture on the right just shows us the processes that are possible when we're generating real world evidence. We could ask questions, we go through the real world data sources. Is it a patient registry or is it electronic health records? We still analyze it and interpret it using statistics, interview surveys, whichever way, and then we gain more insights. And this diversity allows a wide range of information to be available that would not naturally be involved or be available within a clinical trial. Now, let's talk about a case study of where real world data produce real world evidence. So, for background, in 1999, Vioxx, which was NSAID, was launched for osteoarthritis, um, adult pain, and menstrual pain. However, in November of 2000, so less than a year, an article was published that was showing greater number of heart attacks in patients that were taking Vioxx versus naproxen. After about 2 years, Vioxx labeling changes were made in the US because of this data that was had become now public knowledge and available. However, due to delays, by November 2003, the European Medical Agency had concluded that the review of COX-2 inhibitors, saying that the benefits outweigh the risks. And they had said, okay, we're seeing all this data about heart attacks and stuff like that, but the benefits were outweighing the risks. But caution was advised for patients who have history of gastrointestinal or heart problems and who are taking aspirin was provided. So they were saying, okay, we've seen all the reports that there's a big concern about, these cardiac changes that were happening with patients on Vioxx. But after looking at the evidence, the benefits outweigh the risks, but proceed with caution. This happened in November 2003. In September of 2004, the FDA called the marketing authorization holder to discuss the safety data. And a board decision was made to stop a study. that was currently occurring as a comparator study, as it showed an increase in cardiovascular risk and stroke for patients on Vioxx. So this is a year later from the EMA saying proceed with caution, but continue with the drug on the market. So in now September 2004, we show a study that had to be stopped because of the high cardiovascular risk of strokes. And this was the first demonstration of a signal that was coming out of a trial that there is actual evidence that this drug is causing problems. Now, within 3 days, the company on 30th of September 2004 voluntarily withdrew Vioxx worldwide. And then a month later, the EMA starts a review of all COX-2 inhibitors. So this is another example where we're looking at how a drug that went through clinical trials, there was individual case study reports that were solicited because they were generated in trials. The trial was successful. The product was put on the market. Regulatory agents felt like this product was safe enough to put on the market. Once it was on the market, real world data started coming out that there could be an issue here. There could be a signal that we're seeing from different sources. But remember, real world data is not organized, right? So lots of signals coming from different directions. So as you can see, from the signal detection first in November 2000, it took 4 years before the drug was actually removed from the market in September 2004. This is a unique case study, so it'll be nice to just read up about it. It's available on the internet, but it's a good example of how real-world data influence um, safety or pharmacovigilance reporting, and that even though a drug could have passed all these safety trials and be put on the market, the importance or the importance of real world evidence was valuable in stopping this drug and having it withdrawn from the market. So I already went through that. So when we're reporting pharmacovigilance reports, it's not all smooth sailing. What challenges can we get from these reports? What challenges um, do we encounter in pharmacovigilance reporting? The biggest challenge that we have in pharmacovigilance reporting is underreporting. We do not get enough reports, and it's very important that we get enough valid reports. Remember the 4 pillars of our individual case study reports. That is the biggest challenge that we have, that people might think we have enough information. We do. We need as much information. Healthcare providers are not reporting this information to the relevant uh, authorities. So what happens when individual case study reports do not get reported? Well, we miss out on signals. It impacts patient safety. And the truth is, pharmacovigilance depends heavily on voluntary adverse reporting to collect safety data, particularly outside of clinical trials. We depend on people like you who are consumers, who are healthcare providers, who are regulatory bodies to report these things. And it's, for the company, the marketing authorizing holder, there's an obligation to, but for the healthcare providers, for the doctor in his clinic, for the pharmacist in his dispensary, to them it's voluntary. But we are compelled to, because of the Hippocratic oath that we all take as we practice. But there's major underreporting, and this is a limitation for creating signals or notification systems. And it's estimated that 6 to 10% of all adverse drug reactions are actually reported. That's a gap of almost 90% that are not reported. So what aren't people reporting? What is the issue? Well, the problem that this creates when there's underreporting in pharmacovigilance is that we have inaccurate incidence or prevalence rates, right? If we don't know the number of people being affected or the number of people with with the condition, it leaves us with a gap in knowledge. There's limited benefit risk profiling. So if there's underreporting, drugs like Vioxx end up remaining 4 years on the market, even though there was 4 more years on the market, even though there was initial signals or evidence that there is something amiss here, even though it was already on the market. There's delayed activation of risk signal detections, And another challenge, and this I'll focus on when we're talking about the African context, is that not all national regulatory authorities are operating at the mature level, which is determined by the WHO. They have specific standards on maturity of national regulatory agencies, and we'll go on to. So we have identified the problem. We don't have a lot, there's underreporting. It's um, limiting the benefit risk profiling. There's delayed signal activation. So what can help? Healthcare provider and patient education. It's important that all healthcare providers, nurses, physios, pharmacists, doctors, to be reporting. It's very important that there are ways and systems in place for patients themselves to report as well. A patient can report without reporting it to the doctor, but though it's very important to always let your healthcare provider know first. Solution that we need is digital integration of adverse drug reaction reporting within electronic healthcare records. Everything is becoming digitalized, and now we have AI, which is the new thing now. So hopefully this will help streamline the reporting of pharmacovigilance reporting. Regulatory and legislation requirement enforcement. I've said before that it's an obligation to the marketing authorizing holders, but not an obligation to the care providers or the patients themselves. So this is where legislation, regulation, enforcement, and requirements, and also protected time. In a busy clinic, in a busy 9 to 5, where do you find the time to now create time and report after seeing a clinic of 60 patients, after dispensing 100 medications? Where do you find the time to take away and write valid reports where you have to remember patient A reported drug X that started on this day? So we need protected time for people in practice, be clinical, non-clinical practice, to actually be reporting on this. Let's go through another case study of the effect underreporting of pharmacovigilance reports. Now, this is a very, very recent. This is available publicly online. And as you can see, in March of this year, so 2, 3 weeks ago, the US FDA issued a warning to the drug company on the slide of its alleged failure to report adverse effects, side effects, including death in patients who took some of their GLP-1 medications. The FDA wrote to this company on March 5th, and it observed that there were serious violations of reporting requirements during the inspection at one of their facilities. This letter is also available online, and this is an example that when we look at the key findings of the FDA, when you go through the letter, the link is on the slides there. You can search this for yourself. You can look at what was identified as the problem of underreporting. And I'm trying to show you that the underreporting is already happening in the real world. It's also happening within these big pharmaceutical companies. So the FDA had found that there's systemic failures in the way they were reporting adverse drug events. They were not complying with post-marketing adverse drug experience regulations that were specific to the FDA. There was also delays in reporting these adverse effects. They were not reported within the required 15-day timeline. Remember, when we're talking about the impact of these signals, one of them was reporting timelines. And there was no follow-up on these deaths, so suicidality or other serious events. It was not performed because procedures were incorrectly required reporter consent. Right. There are certain, sometimes when you're dealing with spontaneous reporting, a reporter can tell to you, I'm reporting patient A being on this drug, having this side effect since this date, but I don't want to follow up because I don't have the time. But regulation requires that for certain events, particularly death, we take the extra effort to contact the regulators like, look, I know you don't want to be following up, but this is a death event and regulation requires me. So this goes back to the solutions that we're looking for that I presented in the previous slide, that it's very important that legislation and regulatory um, requirements support the reporting of pharmacovigilance reports, because if somebody says they don't want any further contact about this individual case safety reports, you can remind them of either the legislation or regulatory requirement that there's obligation for you to give me this information because of the nature of this information, like a death or suicide as well. So this is a real case study of something that happened within the last month, that even within marketing in big companies, there is still under-reporting. There could be issues with the reporting of pharmacovigilance reports. So let's talk now about the African context. Africa is unique and has a unique context, and because of the diversity that we have, diversity in populations, diversities in economies, diversities in climates, health regulation, and access, it poses for different challenges. So one thing that, I just highlighted, there's a lot of issues that we can, or context that we can provide about Africa, but I just highlighted a few that are specific to pharmacovigilance reporting. We have a unique safety profile in Africa. There's multiple genetic polymorphisms, different regions, different genetic data, and this provides for different drug metabolism patterns. It's very important that we increase reporting within the African context, because the patterns that we may be seeing in Africa may be very different from what's already published in literature, which is mostly a perspective on Western population or Western environments. We have a lot of infectious disease comorbidities, and this is very important to be highlighting drug interactions and overlapping toxicities. In Africa, there's also very strong use of traditional medicine use. And something that's understudied and undercaptured is herb drug interactions. A lot of Western databases are focused on drug-drug interactions. So this is something that if we reported more pharmacovigilance reports within the context of Africa, would get to find out or have an interest, generate evidence on herb drug interactions. Another unique profile that we have, which is unfortunate, is counterfeit medications. There's not a lot of systems for product authentication or quality issues as well. And because of, difference in economies or climates, a lot of the people are susceptible to using counterfeit medications, which kind of impacts safety reporting, because you could be genuinely reporting adverse events experienced for a patient on drug X, but drugs X could be actually a falsified medication. So you've already seen this slide when I was talking about challenges and global challenges in pharmacovigilance reporting and the solutions. This entire slide applies to Africa as well. But now, as Africa is unique, we have even more challenges in addition to all these ones. So we have challenges like the infrastructure limitations. We don't have enough hospitals, we don't have enough pharmacies, we don't have enough equipment, we don't have electronic health care records, we don't have digitization of records, all things that could help with reporting, safety reporting. There's data quality issues. Data quality needs systems and processes to review the data, to assess the data, to highlight the challenges. We have multiple languages and this poor translation, as I think a lot of people on this call probably speak more than one language at home, and we know not everything can be directly translated. Even just when you're practicing day-to-day medicine, trying to translate that. Now, imagine as a marketing authorization holder and you're receiving reports from different corners of one continent, each speaking a different language, and not enough translation. And we also have a challenge of self-prescribing because of limitations or access to healthcare or different economies. Not everybody can go through the proper route of having an appointment with their GP and getting medication prescribed. A lot of it could be self-prescribing. People are using drugs that have been sitting in the cabinet for a while because, of course, they're recycling it. That's a challenge that we'll often see in pharmacovigilance reporting because it impacts the drug and it depends how we receive these reports. Now, for unique African context, we need unique African solutions. We need to incorporate mobile technology adaptation. Before we jump to the big stuff like AI, we need to get the basic stuff right. Not a lot of people have internet or electricity, so using simple mobile technology that doesn't need fancy apps would be something that's relevant for Africa, like something as simple as SMS-based reporting. We need regional collaboration. The African Medicines Agency is still at its infant stages, while we're competing with organizations like the EMA that's been around for decades or the FDA. So African Medical Medicines Agency is still in development and forming itself in the infancy stages. So we still have a long way to go there. We need ways that we don't restrict people from reporting based on that language. We need a way to be able to process natural languages, and that should not be a limitation. We need electronic health records. We cannot have good pharmacovigilance systems based only on paper records, where you have to go to some office in some corner and look for patient X file. So electronic health records would really help. Now, as we come to the end of this presentation slowly, what are the practical applications of all of this? We've talked about the individual case study reports, the stories it's tell. We've spoken about its impact, the challenges we're facing with underreporting. So what can you do on this call? First, report all suspected adverse drug reactions. Don't wait for certainty that this is definitely caused by my drug. It's okay to have a report even if it's not due to the drug, or if you don't know, that is also okay. So report for yourself, for your family, in your line of work. If you're a healthcare provider, report AEs to the relevant authorities. Stay informed. Review safety communications. If you go to your local medical board, there'll always be Dear HPC letters where they're updating clinical practice based on new evidence. If there's a new drug on the market, monitor for known adverse events. Advocate, be an advocate if you're on this call and you're in relevant spaces. Advocate for better systems, encourage integration with existing clinical systems, promote pharmacovigilance awareness within your organization, within your hospital, within your practice, wherever you are. And then think globally. This is not just about one individual case safety reports, it's building up to an aggregate safety report that can impact regulation, that can impact patient information leaflets, that can impact drug safety. So it starts with one person, but it trickles its way down to everybody else. So what you do now will impact what is happening around the world. So I hope from this presentation, you take away the fact that each individual case study report tells a story. Make sure it's a coherent story. Make sure that the 4 pillars of a valid individual case study report are met. And if they're not met, follow up, follow up, follow up, follow up. Quality over quantity. Make sure one excellent report can beat 10 poor reports for signal detection. So for each report that's coming through your desk or that you're aware of, make sure it's a quality report. Real-world data and real-world evidence provide insights that are both robust and broadly applicable to populations. So be on the lookout for real-world evidence and think about how you can generate or harness real-world data to produce or synthesize real-world evidence. And then underreporting is a global challenge in pharmacovigilance. So I am calling out everybody on this teams to please report, report, report. And the African context is very unique. We'll need tailored solutions for specific African problems. Okay, thank you. That is the end of my presentation. So I give it over back to you, David.
Thank Thank you so much for a wonderful presentation and for the insight that you've shared with us, Antatile. We really, really appreciate it. So with this said, I'll take it back for all of us. Anybody with a questions, any comments, please bring them on. I'm seeing there's a question here from Timothy Kimaru. Most HCPs find it hard to report, and when they report, it's incomplete and the process of follow-up is difficult as they become non-responsive. How do we address this? I love the idea of protected time, but how feasible is it in terms of actual practice? Can the regulator help if they enforce its adoption? So those are some of the questions, especially in terms of one is carving out the time, and how do we
Yeah.
address the issue of unresponsiveness of the professionals, especially the
Mm.
HCPs?
Yeah. So this one is very tricky. How do we regulate the non-responsiveness? How do we protect time for people to report? That's I don't know if I have the answer to that. I wish I had a magic bullet, but here are the limitations to providing insensitive by marketing authorization. Imagine if people want to be compensated for that time. Because anytime, if you're a GP, anytime that you're not spending seeing patients is, time you could have spent seeing patients. But we can't, marketing authorizing holders can't also insensitize that because it's undue influence, right? So it's very hard. So I think protected time needs to be maybe when you're already looking into how you're going to run your practice, or you delegate this, within the confines of patient-doctor confidentiality. This is something that can be delegated to, somebody in the practice. It could be reported by you, but you could, after you see a patient, mark it for an administrator in your team that this file needs to be reported, and they go based on what you would have recommended that reported this particular case in this particular patient, and they go on to what do you call it, a system and reporting that depending on what's available in your local system. But digitization and electronic health records would be the best thing because it would allow you, when you're already in a system where you're seeing a patient, you've written in clinical notes, in an ideal setting, you'd be able to check one bucket, one thing that says, should this be reported? On the yellow book, if in the UK, for example. And if you tick yes, it automatically sends an anonymized, or information or pseudo-anonymized data to the regulatory body. And you would just check, like, send the medical history, send the concomitant list, and send today's, narrative and notes. And that will be done within seconds. That's the ideal way if we have electronic health records that are linked to a national system. Now, that's not always possible. So that's just some of the ways I could think of, but it is a challenge. And if anybody has any insights, I'll be happy to hear as well as to how to improve this in practice.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. In some of the contexts, I know for the spontaneous report, it's not as easy, but I've seen
Yeah.
some companies who actually put in place patient engagement specialists or PV, patient safety specialists, leaning mostly on the engagement side with physicians and patients. And that is normally for ongoing, either there's a study that is ongoing or there's an ongoing, I would say it is more of the, how do I call it? It's not the spontaneous one. These are more guided studies where somebody is actually solicited reports. So then you
Yes.
have an individual that is engaged and following up on those particular cases that have been reported and even visiting the HCPs the same way you'll have pharmaceutical marketing representatives going to meet physicians. So then they go in to follow up on any reports that have been reported and actually doing the analysis, mostly for solicited reports. But then for the spontaneous ones, I've not seen anybody implement it yet. Probably that could be a way forward. I don't know how that would work. There's another question that came in here. What is the role of the manufacturer to an individual who develops severe ADRs from the use of their drug?
So no drug is without risks, right? Any drug,
Mhm.
even a herbal medicine, no drug is without a risk or without side effects. So it's very difficult to attribute a specific adverse drug reaction to a specific drug in the real world where patients could be on multiple concomitant medications or have multiple comorbidities. So the first step I would say is always making sure the individual's safe. So first, if you're experiencing a severe adverse drug reaction from the use of the drug, first point of contact is notify and inform and engage with your primary care provider. Where the role of the manufacturer comes in into protecting you is from the aggregate reports. Once we get more and more of these reports saying people are getting these specific severe ADRs, they can protect you by updating the product information leaflets, engaging with healthcare providers, the changing of, clinical protocols. That's how your manufacturer tries to protect an individual. Because once we update those product information leaflets, it impacts how you use the drug, when you're being advised by your doctor as they prescribe it, they can tell you because you're on so and so diseases, you should not be actually on this drug. Or because you're on so and so diseases, be careful when using these drugs. And these are the mitigation steps we can take to protect you when using these drugs. But I think it inevitably needs to be clear that no drug has no side effects, but the manufacturer or the marketing authorization holder protects you using information garnered from these individual case study reports. So it goes back to people actually reporting that. So the first step is reporting that as well. And it may not be a now thing to get protection or provision, but downstream, it will protect others. Yeah. I like the comments I'm seeing in the chat about, enforcement. That is where we need to be at to make sure people, uh, healthcare providers, regulatory bodies, marketing authorization holders, reporting these. As you can see with the case I provided in about the recall by not recall, FDA highlighting specific safety issues, that this is an ongoing problem. This was published public knowledge in this month already. So enforcement, yeah, needs to be a big thing, but enforcement by who? We need the African Medical Agency to be up and running, and hopefully this will come better for the continent. But as you can see, even for well-established economies, this is still a challenge as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. I would say there's a lot of work that needs to be done in the PV space. To a greater extent, the hurdle that comes in is there's no incentive for it. The more the companies are reporting any adverse events, the more likely that their product might be recalled from the market, and therefore then it is not pro-business in one end, but it is good for the public. But also it is good for the patient, good for the business. It's building trust in the quality and the value of the product they're bringing to the market. The question is, how long would it take to determine that value for you in a business context? That is a pain point. For the physicians, I want to see my patients, and therefore then I don't have time to do long reports detailing everything, which is going to take our time away from seeing my patients. So that incentive, I think the key question that we need to ask ourselves, how do we incentivize reporting, but not only reporting, but quality reporting in our pharmacovigilance system? And ultimately then move it to the level where it's socialized, that everybody believes it is a responsibility that we all share, that we all own up to ensure that we are protecting the patients we're serving. We're also ensuring there's quality products that are being made available and accessible to the patients that we serve and engage with. So thank you so much for that. Juliet has brought in our feedback form for all of you guys who are in the call. Please use the QR code that is already presented. And those who need the link, I'm sharing the link in the chat. So you can just respond to the survey, give us your feedback, tell us the things that you like, areas that you think we can make improvement, or a topic that you want us to cover next in our subsequent engagements. So that would be a good starting point from where we are. But we're still taking any questions if you have any questions in the interim. Another piece that I just wanted to mention here, through our training program, we have pharmacovigilance training, and actually we go into in-depth understanding of how do you do the individual case safety reports, the aggregate reporting, but also how do you design your pharmacovigilance system, especially for companies who are operating in the continent. You're looking for support in that, or you want to build your own capabilities as a professional to work within the pharmacovigilance space. We have programs that are in that, and actually enrollment for cohort 2 will be started. It's currently on, but the cohort will be starting in May. So for those of you who are interested, please do sign up, check up our website. The link has already been shared in the chat as well. And let's see how we can support you in your professional and career development journey as you upskill to help us strengthen pharmacovigilance systems in the continent. So that is one key announcement that I wanted to just mention here. As we do that, I'm waiting on to see how many people are responding so that we can see that feedback. Okay, there's another question here on the delay. Please comment on the impact of parallel import. Who is liable on pharmacovigilance for parallel importation?
How much time do you have, Timothy?
That needs a full class, Timothy.
You know what? But at the end of the day, every player in the parallel imports has a role to play. And duplication, there's systems in place. I know FDA has actually a specific section on their website dedicated to duplicate reports, but we're not yet there at the point of over-reporting where we can say, okay, how do we do? So both I think both the marketing authorization holder and the business partner alliance would be held liable for the drug because they involve the manufacturing and distribution of their services. So both of them would be liable to that, in my opinion. Now, I think I'm gonna tie this with the question about um, how we can enforcement of the medical practice that was raised. And I just like to say that we all have a responsibility. There'll never be enough time in the day to do these reports because people are actively in the practice of healthcare or medicine, but this is our responsibility as healthcare providers. So it's very pertinent that we actually do make time for those uh, pharmacovigilance reporting. And in the absence of that, suggest and feedback into your, regulatory bodies, in your, public healthcare system, your governments about creating ways to make it easier. Starts with you speaking up, like, I'd love to do this, but I'm having these challenges. How can you support me as a government? How can you support me as a Ministry of Health? How can you support me as a hospital administrator? How can you support me, as a pharmacy owner as well? So speak out and engage and remind these the responsible people about how our obligations and our, the requirement for reporting. So it's an ongoing discussions, and I think we need to, we need more. We have more problems than we have solutions for, but that we should not give up.
Thank you for that. And I would say maybe just to add to this context, Timothy, when we look at parallel importation, we have different markets where the regulatory frameworks for parallel importation is actually more robust and they have obligations which are enforceable. So then when you see, and Tatila is talking about the aspect of duplicate reporting, it's a system where the parallel importer have their own pharmacovigilance reporting system. The actually marketing authorization holder also has their own parallel, I would say their own PV reporting system. So ultimately, when these reports end up at the regulatory authority, they end up being duplicate reports depending on the distribution channel for that particular product because it is a regulated mechanism. In most of our African markets, the unfortunate situation is we have parallel importation, which is regulated on paper, but in terms of practicality and the application on having robust pharmacovigilance monitoring system by the parallel importers, it is not enforced as much. And when it is not enforced, the risk now comes to you as the marketing authorization holder and the owner of the product brand, because if there's a safety issue, it is your brand that is coming into the market and the name of your product. So ultimately, then when you look at it from a business standpoint is you want to maximize your upside, minimize the downside, and ensure that you're operating in compliance with the regulatory mechanisms. Somebody brought you a product, you have no limitation and no restriction on what you can do. But any untoward outcome as a result of your product or your brand being in the market will ultimately be blamed on you as the owner of that license, as the owner of the trademark. So therefore, then by default, you have to own it up and actually put in measures. Unfortunately, that is not the best case because then you are incurring a cost for somebody's profitability margins that they are making on their end. So it's a conversation that needs to be had. But the question is, where will we have the conversation and how do we make it be a critical thing that everybody have to align on and agree on the way forward for it? So that is what I would add on that. Great. With that said, I see we have 27 responses. I'll encourage that we get more feedback. I see we still have more than 100 people in the room, so let's get that feedback to us. Juliet has already shared it, so I'm hoping all of us have taken it. If not, the link is already in the chat as well. But I'll just bring up my screen as we're almost towards the tail end of the session. And for this, now when I bring my screen up, I want to give you guys an update. There's a forum that we are hosting next month rather, on April 16th with the WHO on facilitated regulatory pathways. This is mostly going to focus on alternative pathways that will make products accessible to people within the region. We have WHO facilitated pathway, WHO pre-qualified methods, either for medicines or medical device and in vitro diagnostics. But also we have the Swiss Medic MAG HP, the European Medicines Agency, EUM for all. So this particular forum will be mostly talking about how does the process work? How can you take advantage of it? But also what are the technical nuances? And in a case you're considering using any of them, where do you get the help that you can to be able to go through those processes? And I'll just mention here from the work that we're doing as well in this conversation is helping people understand the pathways. And the opportunity from our engagement is that we offer scientific advice for anybody who is intending to use any of the different pathways. So we are more than glad to support. Reach out to us through the email that is already provided at the bottom of the screen. And this webinar is already available on our website. So check out on our website and register for it as we prepare for the next engagement. We'll be having our industry discussion forum. With that said, I'll hand it over to you to Ntatile in case you have any last comments or last remarks that you want to give us as we close the call today.
No, nothing from my side. I'm just truly grateful for this opportunity, and I hope that people gained a lot from this. And yeah, they can find me on LinkedIn if they have further questions, and I'll try to respond. And thank you for having me, David. I appreciate it.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much and have a good evening, everyone.
Okay.
Enjoy the rest of your days and the rest of your evening.
Bye.